Vampires in Iraq. So I wanted to get to this one today. I can only do so many of these a day. Obviously, the light behind me is going. That's how you know what time of day it is. When it's daylight, I do these, and when the sun goes down, I stop doing it. Otherwise, I'd be doing these all day, and I would not, probably not be healthy. So, your voice gets tired, your brain gets tired. It's mentally exhausting to think about this much stuff and try to be this sincere. But I found this morning, and I wanted to get through it. It's about 40 pages, but it's a lot of stuff. So we're just going to go through and we're just going to read it. I'll stop and I'll comment when I think I should comment to explain stuff. But these are notes I took out of a couple books, Fiasco and Night Draws Near. And then there's also, I think, another one, but I don't know if I put the title down, so it might just blend in with the other notes. As I read, especially like stuff that like I feel is really dense, whether it's art or whether it's nonfiction, excuse me, I'm just adjusting my shorts, sitting down for a while, it gives you swamp balls. As you read stuff that's like really dense, like intellectually or like, for fiction or nonfiction or whatever, I always take notes, a lot of notes. At this point, Twilight was coming out, 2008, and I was starting to really get that, like, a lot of feelings like the Iraq War was bullshit. A lot of us knew it. There was the largest worldwide protest to try to stop that war from happening before it happened. And then now that's totally out of our narrative. Now we're not even acknowledging that those wars are still going on. Every politician that comes up on a national stage in the United States has a strong contingency of anti-war sentiment, which pushes them. Trump talked against the war, and that's why one of the major reasons why he was elected. So did Obama. So does every single Congress. And then every time the Democrats control the House and they control the presidency, and they didn't do shit to stop these wars. So we have to acknowledge that all these people can't be evil. There might be a large pro-war contingency of assholes who are pushing it, but our systems are failing us. That our warfaring systems are so automatic that it has a life of its own. Bush brokered the war and the Project for the New American Century and Cheney and Rumsfeld and all that. But they alone can't keep all of these mechanisms going. There's something else going on here. This is a positive feedback loop that we have to take a step back and just acknowledge that, like, it's insane how self-sufficient it is, how it just, no matter, the will of the world was against that war and it still went. And then the will of our constituency, every single election cycle is against those wars, and they not only continue, but they propagate. Obama started actions in, I think it was Yemen, definitely, in Libya, in Syria. When Obama was running for office and they said that his foreign policy was no different than John McCain, that was borne out. He didn't start the war with Iran, but what else did he do that John McCain would have done differently? When the Iraq War started, I remember reading the story about this guy who drove to Washington, D.C. and just drove around. He didn't know what to do. He knew that it was another Vietnam. He knew it was a travesty against the American conscience, against our treasury. We've $3-4 trillion that could be going back into our country. We're not getting anything out of that. It's creating more global instability. Gaddafi in Libya said, if you come into my country, he didn't think we were that stupid. He was like, if you come into my country and destroy my country, which is what we've done. We've bombed them and we've destroyed the fabric of their society back to a third world country when they had the high standard of living. In Africa, he said, we are the buffer between you and the terrorists in Africa. You don't, or just asylum-seeking people. They were a refuge for a large. I don't have the words or the research to back this up. It's just little things that I pick up, little patterns. But a large part of what's going on right now in 2018 has to do with Obama getting rid of Gaddafi. And that's why we need new political leaders and new political systems, because all of this stuff is interconnected. This is me reading about it back in 2008. And I felt like this truth needs to get out. It's not making it into the popular culture. They took Phil Donahue off the air, and there's internal memos leaked saying that he's too intellectually honest. He's going to question war, and it's not going to be a good look for us at a wartime footing. They took Bill Maher off the air because he just questioned that we shouldn't vilify these terrorists who flew into the towers, because technically sacrificing your life for your ideals is not cowardly. So all he tried to do was just correct the definition of words slightly. Say that as we ramp up the propaganda war machine for the war that we all knew was coming, let's not muddle language, because him as an entertainer and a comedian cares a little bit about language, like George Carlin. And he wasn't defending the terrorists, he just said that you technically can't use the word coward for someone who gives their life for what they believe in, even if what they believe in cause you, personal harm. So there was a narrowing of culture, which hasn't really lessened up. That, now you have to be more patriotic, now you have to support the war. I saw that. I went to my corner in Redlands with my BDUs, holding up a sign saying that war in the modern age is a war against women and children. And people didn't throw stuff at us, but they definitely yelled at us, and they definitely slowed down their car to yell at us. No one supported us. No, not no one. Like 1 out of every 10 supported us, and like 5 out of every 10 yelled at us. Most people, I don't know those numbers. I don't know how many people passed by and didn't do anything. But out of the people who did do something, most of them yelled at us, and a small fraction actually said, "Thank you, we're glad that you're out here." And that was me wearing military camo, thinking that, let's let them see that, like, I'm a guy who chose to serve. Didn't do a good job. Most of the jobs I've chosen to do didn't do a good job. I was a good real estate broker. That's when I made a lot of money. That's the time that I decided to actually commit to a career. But so we're going to do this. I'm going to read through these notes, because at the time I was like, I have to get this truth out. I have to do something. Twilight was big. Vampires were big. I was like, I'm going to set a piece of fiction in Iraq with vampires. I was going to borrow a plot from George, so now I'm starting to borrow more, and I'm starting to, be like, all right, if I can't get it all out on my own, I'll just borrow a little bit of that, a little bit of this. I was going to take a George Bernard Shaw plot, Arms and the Man, set it in Iraq, a soldier who happens to be a vampire, fighting the good fight. We're in Iraq fighting Iraqis, fighting terrorists, and then there's also this vampire-human battle going on, which has been since the ages. There's plenty of symbolism and spirituality and old mysticism you can draw from old civilizations, because Baghdad is an ancient city. This guy who's a vampire fighter finds refuge in a journalist's balcony from the guy who's persecuting him, who's searching for him, which is what happens in Arms and the Man. A soldier ends up in aristocrat's balcony, this girl, the daughter of an aristocrat, and he seeks refuge because people are looking for him, and he hides in the curtains and stuff, and they later on fall in love, and it turns into like this, what would you call that, comedy of errors, or I don't know. It was an interesting play, and I thought it would have been interesting if you just put it in Iraq, add vampires. A lot of my ideas, I think, would have taken off if I stuck with them, but in order to do that, I wouldn't have dared to do that without the right info, and I didn't serve, and I didn't want to bug my friends on their personal experiences. I knew better than that. The ones who did serve, I didn't want to go and like sit down with them and be like, oh yeah, tell me about how shitty it was over there. I had already got 1 or 2 emails, and that was enough about telling me how it was. One of my friends, he emailed me just during the thick of it. He was a Cab Scout, and he was like, it's tough to shoot at people who are no older than your brother, and his brother at the time was 6 or 7. But that's all he said. He didn't say much more. Just, it's tough to shoot at people who are not much older than your younger siblings, and but you have to when they pick up a gun, and it's either you or them. And he didn't have the easiest time adjusting. He lived on the street for a little bit. He would get drunk with us, and he would end up cleaning his weapons, lock himself in his room, and we hear him cleaning his weapons. We had to take him away. We were like, you can't do that, man. You can't, just heading off the problems. Like, we support him in the best we can, but we can't have you drunk, messing with your firearms. Once he passed out in my car next to me, and he would get that. We're like, you know not to mess with him. And I was trying to get him out of the car. He wouldn't move out of the car, and then he got a little violent with me, and then he had his knife, pretty big, like military knives, like K-bars, on his lap. And I sat in my car with him, because like, it's one of those things, like, we're not like, you don't let your friends push you around no matter how crazy they are. But he had a big knife, on him. So like I'm just waiting out his drunk to make sure he doesn't hurt himself or other people. But like I'm babysitting a veteran with trauma issues from what he's done that none of us really are in a position to talk to him about. We know better than to like really probe. And he has a big ass knife on him. So you wait him out and you try to be there for your friends the best you can. My cousin went, and you're going to see some notes in this about that. He went and he got some trauma that now he's 100% disabled, and he didn't. This is hard to contextualize because I wasn't there and I only know secondhand through the family, and I wasn't close to my cousin. I've talked to him now, but he's not really there now. He's on medication that keeps him from being violent, but he's a little loopy, you know. He's not. He'll just stare off. He talks a lot about God and religion, just reads the Bible, but he can't hold a job, can't have a relationship, and he's medicated, so he's not violent. How his brain broke, how he became that way, he didn't acclimatize to war well or the combat situation. He was a driver, and he was told not to stop, so he ran into a lot of dogs or anything else that was in the road. I've heard children, other stuff. But his commander ordered him, don't stop in the road when we're driving places, and he was a driver for their commander. That messed him up a little bit. And then also, he's always been a little bit like soft, a little bit like sensitive. That might be in the family. But that doesn't make you a good soldier when your other fellow soldiers depend on you. And it got to the point that they didn't trust him, and so they sent him out with a fake weapon. So he would go on patrols with everyone else, and they were actually doing patrols, going door to door. And in Iraq, and he had a dummy gun. They took out his firing pin of his rifle, and so you imagine a big part of the PTSD from what I've heard and what I've seen is a fight or flight response that's hard to turn off once you're in civilian life. If you watch that movie American Sniper, and he's at the party with the children, and this is a total normal situation with a family, but he can't stop scanning for threats, because once your brain is so accustomed to that fight or flight, that's what keeps you alive, is scanning for threats and paying attention to stuff, because you're in a heightened state, which once your brain has learned how to do that to keep you alive, and now you're in civilian life, I guess that's one of the issues, that's one of the things that's hard to adjust to. So imagine doing that and you don't have a weapon to protect yourself. I think that's my opinion from hearing stuff from other people, is what broke his brain. I don't know what he did to his fellow soldiers to make them want to do that to him. I know that when I was in the military, I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but I told my friend about it, the one who was a Cav Scout, and he was like, yeah, well, fucking, he shouldn't have been a dumbass. He had no sympathy for him, because if you're in that scenario, I could understand how they can't trust you with a weapon, but he shouldn't have been sent out with no weapon, though, definitely, because then when you're in a firefight, everyone else at least could shoot back, and what the fuck are you doing? So I have notes. That was going to be a part of the story, to try to tell his story. I didn't go there, though, so I was reading these books, and I was trying to figure out what the fuck is going on in Iraq, and I got some notes that when I read them now, I forgot most of this. I'm sure it became a part of like my ideas and my beliefs and why that war is so important to me, the personal part with my family and everything, but also just with the disconnect between these facts in readily accessible books, which were bestsellers on Amazon and on the publisher's list, and they just have no currency in our popular culture, but the Marvel movies do. But the Glorious War and the Glorious Fighters do, and Captain America. You could keep your Captain America. I want to better know the actual conflicts that are actually transpiring in the world and the actual victims of suffering. And you can keep your superheroes. That has no relevance in my life, and it's actually an insult. But, alright, so. Mideast Iraq notes. U.S. encouraged Shiites and Kurds to rebel in 1991, but didn't support them. They approved an exception to the no-fly rule to permit Iraqi helicopter flights. Shot up streets of southern cities, 80,000 Iraqi Republican guards, along with hundreds of tanks, armored fighting vehicles, and armed helicopters were allowed to mercilessly crush the uprising across Iraq with a viciousness not seen since Stalin. If they wanted to free Iraq, they would have seized southern Iraq's oil fields and turned them over to the rebel forces, who made them a part of the larger demilitarized zone. U.S. did not back Afghani leader, let him get trapped and killed trying to liberate his country. These are just notes I'm taking while I'm reading the books. I'm just like, all right, this is important. This might be useful. And then some of them are for my own edification. SWAG, scientific wild ass guesses, military terminology. Desert Crossing, War Games, April 1999. Plan had called for a force of 400,000 for the invasion, 240,000 more than approved. Outcomes of an invasion of Iraq aimed at unseating Saddam Hussein. Tested worst case and most likely scenarios of a post-war, post-Saddam Iraq. Results of Desert Crossing, regional instability by opening the doors to rival forces bidding for power, societal fragmentation along religious and or ethnic lines, and antagonize aggressive neighbors if replacement government were perceived as weak, subservient to outside powers, or out of touch with other regional governments. An exit strategy complicated by differing visions for a post-Saddam Iraq among those involved in the crossing. So, Desert Crossing was War Games in 1999 where they actually tested best and worst case scenarios. So we knew what we were getting into in 2003, and a lot of the things that came up were things that we predicted just 4 years ago. This is all historic record, you just have to find it. The question, it's not that we have to find the answers in society, we have to apply the answers that are just laying in front of us. It's not that we're being oppressed, we're being distracted from the truth that's at our feet. U.S. were to establish a transitional government, it would likely encounter difficulties. Some groups discussed from a period of widespread bloodshed in which various factions seek to eliminate their enemies. The report stressed that the creation of a democratic government in Iraq was not feasible, but a new pluralistic Iraqi government, which included nationalistic leaders, might be possible, suggesting that nationalistic leaders were a stabilizing force. U.S. role should be one in which it would assist Middle Eastern governments in creating a transitional government for Iraq. Ought to look at political reconstruction, economic reconstruction, security reconstruction, humanitarian needs, services, and infrastructure development. So this is like, some of this is like what we should have done compared to what we actually did. So this what we should have done was right there too. So when people say we failed in Iraq, it's like, was it failure because we had the right answers right in front of us, we chose not to apply them. Point of above. They knew exactly how to execute a successful war and inversely how to initiate chaos. Brammer did the opposite, as if following a checklist. U.S. military maxim violated in Iraq: fight as you train. Alongside who you train, there was always pressure from OSD. Could we do it smaller? Prince Sultan Air Base, PSAB. Isolated facility on the edge of Saudi Arabia's empty quarter. Swimming pools, tennis courts, movies, half prison, half spa. 97 to 03, follow Baghdad. To win war is easy. To preserve its fruits, difficult. Sun Tzu. Disillusion of Iraqi military dumped 1.4 million men into a shattered economy. So we destroyed their economy, and now we have 1.4 million men with nothing to do. OSD's contempt for the accumulated wisdom of the military profession. The OSD is Office of Secretary of Defense. So they created basically the recruiting grounds for terrorism by having a bunch of military-trained, military-aged men with nothing to do. Didn't have the political capital to commit the required number of troops, didn't care about the Iraqi people or U.S. troops or mission, just wanted to get in there in an irreversible position. This is either top-down, intentional, or institutional because of the incentive structure of our military-industrial complex. So either it's intentional or the institutions are corrupt to the core, but those are the two leading explanations for how we got to the situation we're at in Iraq right now. Truly, God does not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves. The Quran, Surah 13:11. In Bosnia, they used a rule of thumb, 1 soldier for every 50 Bosnians. That would mean there should be 300,000 troops for Iraq. So if you're using our standard peacekeeping, and we need 300,000 troops in Iraq to actually do the job. How, like, the military wasn't just formed yesterday. They know the science of what they're supposedly trying to do. We just don't follow what their own research and science claims. Not counting the peaceful Kurdish North. To meet this ratio, since you can't send more troops, you kill more Iraqis. Makes sense. These are educated men. They are smart men, but they are not wise men. That was a 4-star general. So every now and then you find these people who, like, the whole military can be corrupt. There's people who are like smart, when I was in the military, I met really good, amazing people. I met a couple assholes and I was like, all right, culture's kind of funny. But like, you also meet that super soldier where you're like, I'm so glad this dude is defending my country. So you'll find that you'll have a lot of people with some good wisdom in here. It's almost as if, unintentionally, we were working with Zarqawi to create the maximum amount of chaos possible. Almost as if unintentionally. Iraqi army would have been a ready resource pool for labor-intensive civil works projects. So, if we had someone other than Bremer, or if we had other motives, other than creating complete chaos, we could have had a civil works projects going on in Iraq. They added that one of the highest standards of living in its area. Iraqi army would have been British took over from the Ottomans after World War II or World War I. There was no Phase 4 plan for occupation, either purposeful or institutional, because there is incentives for incompetence, morale hazard, like workers' compensation in California or the housing crisis. Because of incompetence, CPA, the Coalition or Provisional Authority, unable to provide basic services like electricity, clean water, security to Iraqi population. What is it called when you criminally neglect a population under your military control, whether Iraqi or Palestinian? It's like abusing a pet. Pros of disbanding Iraqi army and de-Baathification. Limited forces and setting up Iraqi failure. Breed terrorism. Let it take hold, extended stay. It's an excuse to be there and build bases. Longest war means more money. Like insurance or any other protectionist racket, if you are underwriting the risk and there's no regulation, you have a morale hazard to preferring increased losses in order to reap more premiums. So me having an insurance background, am I relating this to a unregulated insurance market, which is what the credit default swap was in the housing bubble. So I'm just seeing the patterns here in economics and applying it to war, because war is a racket, as Smedley Butler said, the old general who at one point looked back on his military career and realized, I'm just making profit for corporations. So I'm trying to connect, where's the profit motive in war? And I'm realizing that, this is the character of our whole military-industrial complex. Profits from increased risk, conflict, world instability. The incentives for peace are outweighed monetarily. 247 army tanks in force driving into Iraq from Kuwait, about the same Bradleys. Entire ground force was about 145,000. 3rd Infantry Division, the 3rd ID, in March 03 sprinted 90 miles from Kuwait border across desert to seize a key airfield, some bridges near Euphrates. Headed north along west bank of river towards Karbala. April 3rd took Saddam National Airport on western fringe of Baghdad. 2 days later, launched Thunder Runs. 3rd ID 2nd Brigade slammed repeatedly with RPGs and rifle fire at point-blank range. Every vehicle hit at least once. 8 hours of continuous fighting. This is just the reality of the invasion. There should have been a minimum of 2 heavy divisions and an armored cavalry regiment on the ground. That's how our doctrine reads. So that's the commanders saying that this is when I say that the troops got screwed, this is how the troops got screwed. If you talk to and this is not my research, this is Thomas Ricks' research, and that's what type of author he is. He tries not to be so political. I'm the guy who's interpreting this stuff politically and adding that context to it. But Thomas Ricks just cares about the soldiers. He's a military historian type guy, and his books he goes to the soldiers and he gets embedded with them and he tries to put their point of view. And they're saying that we got fucked. They're saying that our doctrine reads that we needed more troops and we needed more support than we were given. And goes back to Rumsfeld. This is why people hate Rumsfeld. He says we fight wars with the army that we have, not the army we wanted. You're setting people up for failure that way. Strategy. 4 questions. Who are you? What are you trying to do? How will you do it? What resources and means will you employ to doing it? 4 answers give rise to 1 strategy. Tactics. The facts, actions on ground. Strategy is the art of situation. Between tactics and strategy is operational level of large units, enemy's center of gravity, long view of battlefield, where you don't just attack a front, but the depths behind it as well. Where is your enemy's center of gravity? And then this is story stuff from my story I was starting to formulate. Nick tells Fran this while he rants about politics, because I want to apply this tactic strategy discussion to the political discussion. Every strength contains seeds of its own weakness. 1973, Arab-Israeli Yom Kippur War surprise attack from Syria and Egypt led to counteroffensive, won in 6 days, but had been fighting for 30 years. 50 cal heavy machine gun capable of tearing off limbs and exploding skulls. Policeman helping U.S. shot outside his house and traitor written on his forehead. 4th ID were mean and overly aggressive, pointing weapons at civilians. Again, this is Tom Rick's research. November 10th is Marine Corps' birthday. Coming up. They were told that the weapons bunkers may contain WMDs, so they bypassed them, and insurgents armed themselves at leisure. So there's these little things that happened during the invasion that were really interesting. They had weapons bunkers that they didn't secure because they were told they might contain WMDs. And so they didn't secure them, they secured the oil fields. And that's how their insurgency armed themselves. The insurgency being the over $1.5 million men who we left without jobs or anything to do. Most of them military trained. Not most of them, but the debathification meant that a lot of military trained guys were left with nothing to do. Because of lack of troops, borders left largely open. Jihadists came in from Syria. 2 basic rules of military command: unity of command and mass. 3rd ID officer told that once he got to Baghdad, he'd go home. There's no plan. They just said, get to Baghdad and you're done. That's called mission creep. When all of a sudden you get to Baghdad and they say, okay, now do this, now do that. It's not an honest way to treat, your soldiers. Just because someone signs up to be a soldier and defend this country doesn't mean that you can just abuse them and use them however you want. I believe strongly in that. You have an obligation to lead with integrity. And even more so for the soldiers, because they've signed away their Bill of Rights. They don't have a right to protest, and they don't have a right to talk back. You get court-martialed for that. You can get you could get killed for that. You could get executed for treason. And so you don't have. We're the ones. The civilian oversight of the military is the basis of democracy. We're the ones who are supposed to have their back, because they can't do it themselves. From within the army, you can't criticize the army. So that's why it has to come from without. That's why I feel so strongly about this. I was on a street corner in Baghdad smoking a cigar, watching some guys carry a sofa, and it never occurred to me that I was going to be the guy to go get that sofa back. Special Operations acts and is treated as if it's separate from the army. Wait until you hear about how the CIA acts. May 23rd, CPA Order Number 2, Dissolution of Iraqi Entities. Formally got rid of Iraqi Armed Forces, 385,000 people. Staff of Ministry of Interior, 285,000. Police and Domestic Security. Presidential Security, 50,000. All military colonel or above deemed senior party member not eligible for pension. Tens of thousands of influential Iraqis. So we have tens of thousands of influential Iraqis, colonel and above. That's the leadership. Who are they going to lead? They're going to lead the over 600,000 people, 670,000 people about that you just kicked out of their military police careers. So you just created over 500,000 military trained disgruntled people who invaded their country with the pretext of international support, but we know it was just America. And then we just stopped the over 10,000 people from collecting their pensions. Like, at some point you have to stop saying these are mistakes and say that we're just moving pieces on the board and just creating an opposition to justify our presence there. This is page 3 of 41. I'm going to have to stop this video. It's already at 30 minutes. We're going to start it tomorrow. And we're going to finish this. This might be a little bit longer, but it's important. And this is why I haven't read through this in over 10 years. Because it's heavy, but it needs to be said, and I need to go through it. And now is the time to do it. So thank you for your patience, even if I'm only speaking to myself.